Welcome to the Unearthed Man Podcast, the journey of becoming a conscious man, hosted by Milvo. Hey all, Milvo here, and welcome to episode 36 of the Unearthed Man Podcast. To kick off, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands on which we work and gather, and their continuing connection to land and waters. I pay respect to elders past, present, and emerging. I pay tribute to the diversity of First Nations peoples of Australia and their ongoing culture. If this is your first time listening to the podcast, then welcome aboard. If you're one of my regular listeners, then welcome back. I really appreciate your ongoing support. If you're looking to know more about the Unearthed Man, then you can find me on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Now, before I move on to today's guest, I just wanted to say what a pleasure it was talking to Jeddy Azuma last week. As you would have heard, Jeddy has a quiet peacefulness to him. However, at the same time, he's very purposeful in everything that he does. I love his newfound connection to the Native American prayer and what he's doing to bring back true initiation processes. Now, on to today's guest. Since the commencement of the Unearthed Man podcast in 2020, I wanted to have a chat with today's guest. He and I have a lot in common when it comes to overcoming a certain addiction, meditation, and what's become a newfound interest for me. He has been a practitioner and teacher of personal and spiritual development for over a decade. An avid student of mindfulness and meditation, he graduated from the Blue Mountain School of Mindfulness Arts seminary program in May 2018 with a master's in Buddhist Ministry and was ordained Osho, or priest, in May 2019. In his capacity, he now serves as a spiritual guide and interfaith chaplain in prisons and hospitals. He began his studies in Buddhism and New Thought as a young adult, seeking resolution to his own personal life dilemmas. Overcoming his 20-plus year compulsive relationship with porn, he was inspired to share his journey and support other men in their path to liberation. Through his online Facebook support community, Making Peace with Porn, he currently runs the 90-day Liberation Bootcamp, as well as the 10-day Porn Abstinence Challenge. He is passionate about the community's commitment to support men in ending their toxic relationship with porn so they can reclaim their power and create a life worth living. Welcome to the Unearthed Man Podcast, Matt Sinkovitz. Hey, Matt, how you doing?
Well, Stephen, thanks so much for having me, and thanks for that introduction.
No, it's no problems at all. It's, as I said, it's since I probably opened up my journey, which is the back end of 2019, we connected in on Facebook, and then I was certainly watching what you were doing in Facebook, and particularly around the Making Peace with Porn area. Yeah. I know I was part of that group as well. I sort of dropped out of groups because I was getting too consumed in social media, but I love what you're doing it because for me, I was the same. One of my addictions, alcohol was one, and the other one was porn. I stopped watching porn in November 2019 after I sort of went through my process. Glad to say I haven't watched an episode since. So that's something I'm definitely very proud of, and I'm certainly quite passionate about now. So your journey, let's have a chat about your journey and where you got to, where you've come along, I suppose.
Oh yeah, I mean that's a big conversation piece, and yeah, I appreciate you sharing. The porn and alcohol have a way of going hand in hand.
Yes.
One has a way of fueling the other, certainly. So for me, I'm 38 years old at the time of this interview. And so as you mentioned in my introduction there, 20 plus year relationship with pornography started in my teens. I was fortunate enough to, be introduced to the internet when internet was just dial-up speed in the house. Yep. Not like a lot of kids today who have, I think, a bigger challenge ahead of them with the phone in their pocket, being born with that thing in their hand almost, But yeah, got into pornography at a young age, like so many boys, out of curiosity, excitement, and kind of unaware of the potentially toxic or damaging effects of pornography in my life, and something that continued on through my young adult years and into my, 20s and 30s. And it wasn't until, I would say into my 30s, I began to kind of really awaken to the toxic nature of pornography, the way that porn seemed to be impacting all the key areas of my life, and was really, I found to be an impediment to my spiritual growth, to my personal growth, relationships, business, and really connecting to my own sense of purpose in the world and the work that I felt called to be doing. And in my spirituality, my walk with God, whatever that means to you. And I think that's really the gist of it. And I really feel that it was impacting my sense of the integrity, maybe I would say, that I felt as a leader, moving into greater levels of leadership, kind of recognizing that porn was out of alignment for me as the man that I felt called to be, my own sense of integrity. I felt there was an impact there as well. So ended up getting my own coach and my own support around it and doing the deep work, and continue to do the work around pornography in my own life and my own sexuality, which has been a big theme for me. So big, long journey, but a lot of success. And it's really cool to be here today having this conversation with you on the other end of it,
Yeah, no, cool. And I appreciate that. I'll take a step back. I was a video, the days of video porn. So made it a bit harder to hide because you had to at least put it in a videotape and a television. But, I know if my wife was going out or different things, like, you would sneak it in and, and that sort of thing. So, so my history runs a little bit longer, going back to the fact that, the good old days of video, and then obviously, into dial-up and so forth. I just want to touch back because one of the things, as you said, there is like incongruence between, the leadership and wanting to become a leader. And also, and I really want to talk into, your spirituality and, where you're with Buddhism and those elements, because I'm fascinated in that area as well. And, being with porn, because there's a lot of shame and guilt that runs with porn. So was that part of where you felt the incongruence, or that was, how do you align the fact of, if I want to be a leader and follow a spiritual journey, but I'm actually got this level of, underlying shame, guilt, almost, self-worth and, looking back in at yourself? Was there elements of that?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I'm not sure exactly why pornography does have this impact and seems to create feelings of guilt, shame, fear, remorse, affects our sense of self-worth. That could be our own story around it, but it also could just be because it is so much out of alignment with maybe who we are or who we're called to be. Maybe there's something on a very subtle spiritual level that kind of that we know is just out of congruence, So for me, I think I think into my 20s and into my 30s, I began just to awaken to one, the negative impact it was having in my life, but also that it was just not cool for me, and there was just something not good, not healthy about it. And it was also in my 30s that I began moving into more spiritually aligned work, being called more to the work that I do now in the Buddhist tradition, and really feeling called to work with others and being of service to others and share my gifts and my talents in that way. And also at that, in my 30s, I began doing work in prisons and stuff like that, leading spiritual groups, meditation groups, mindfulness groups in our local county prison. And it was just moving into that kind of work, that I just kind of felt like, man, it felt out of alignment, out of integrity for me to be doing that sort of work or moving into that sort of work when I still had these unresolved skeletons in my own closet. There's something about porn that doesn't allow us oftentimes to look into the eyes of others honestly, and I felt like in my work, I really needed to be able to do that. Whenever you see me, I'm not hiding anything about myself. You know what I mean? Or of course there are parts and components of my life which are personal, but I don't have anything that I have this shame around, or if someone knew about it, I would have a deep shame around,
Yeah, no, and I really appreciate that. On a very similar page with you when it comes to that. The interesting thing that I'm probably finding now, and I'd be interested in your thoughts, is how much are we, there's probably two things that I want to ask. Maybe I'll go back to the first one. Is one of the challenges I had of having the addiction into the porn and being with that is then the separation of objectifying and subjectifying women. And, and then that relationship you actually have with, with the other gender, being the female gender. But I obviously, I can't talk on behalf of like the homosexual community or the lesbian, gay, that area, but I'm guessing it's probably something similar in the fact that if they're watching porn, it's objectifying, whatever that attractiveness is, as opposed to just seeing them as a beautiful human being. And I know that even now, that's something that I work through and are working through. I have to keep questioning myself. If I see someone, am I seeing them as just another beautiful human being, or am I actually seeing them as an object due to a whole lot of addictions I've actually had?
Yeah.
Your thoughts on that?
Well, it's very true. We grow. I think there's probably a normal part of it of being a young boy, a young man. We are bred to procreate, and the sex drive is a real thing, and there is this attraction that exists. So I think there's a healthy part of it. Yeah, but I think that porn really creates this unhealthy, unrealistic objectification, and we see women even more so as just a sex object and something to someone or something to do something to and yeah, and I think that's very unconscious. I still notice that within myself. I think I'm still I think that's still filtering out, so to speak, as I continue to grow and mature and learn to see through a new lens. I still notice bits and pieces of that exist, but 100%, I think we condition ourselves to do it through the consumption of pornography.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. And I know that's something that I'm working through. The other element that I didn't want to talk through is, and I spoke with Jetty last week about this, is the word that sits a lot in my mind now is around indoctrination. And for me, porn's almost, to a degree, it's one of those things, as you said, it's like it's on a mobile phone in someone's pocket now. Like before, as I said earlier, like you had to find a way to actually make sure no one's home so you could at least put the videotape in. Like, there's an area on that, but now you can almost be watching it anywhere as you're walking along the street or so forth, if you want to be secret enough. So how much are we normalizing it now? Like how much is it almost being seen as, and what's the risks around if it becomes normalized as opposed to going, no, that is still not an appropriate thing to be doing?
Yeah.
Which leads into the work that you're really doing about the, making peace with it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's very much normalized. And there's almost a humor around it, I think in conversation in society today, it's just viewed and kind of perceived as something very normal that people do. I think a lot of people don't recognize that it is such a deep issue for so many people. The people that do joke about it or just kind of write it off don't recognize what's really going on behind the scenes for a lot of men. But I think, the fact that it's just kind of viewed as just something normal that boys do, which it is. And maybe there is, I like to play devil's advocate and recognize that maybe pornography at some level can be healthy, and maybe someone can have a healthy relationship with it. But for guys like us, or maybe people who have a toxic tendency toward it, it can be very unhealthy. But yeah, it's definitely been normalized. And just between the societal conversation that goes on around it and the expectation that guys are going to do it anyway, there seems to be a lot of joking. I talk to a lot of men who deal with this, and when they bring it up, maybe guys in military environments and stuff like that, it's just a bro thing and just, whatever, no big deal. And it's just very normal and it's joked about. And especially being on the phones today, it's just a very normal part of people's lives. I think very unconsciously, they don't even kind of recognize maybe the ramifications of it. And also because of that, there's this desensitization, I think that's occurring to sex, and to women, and the whole porn genre in general seems to be getting more and more extreme and graphic in nature, as it becomes more normalized.
Yeah. No, I agree. The other thing that pops into mind as we're having this conversation is how much do you feel that this is now removing the role of the father to actually, for one of the challenges, I think, like my parents, strict Catholics, right? And so, I think about the book that everyone got, which is This Is What Happens to Your Body When You Grow Up, right? But there was never any conversation except for don't ever get a woman pregnant outside of marriage, right? Mm-hmm. Which is one of the 5 things my parents told me not to do, which I successfully achieved. But I feel that there's parts of that now where people, because there is still this dogma about having the sex talk with your kids and the embarrassment behind it. That it's now easy just to say, oh, well, they're probably going to be watching porn anyway, so I don't have to take on that responsibility as a parent, because they're probably going to talk to their mates and they're probably going to be able to look at it and they'll work it out anyway. Yeah. Are you seeing that happening?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I think, that was the situation for me. Like, I grew up in the Christian home, and sex was just kind of a conversation you didn't have that much. Whenever you did have it, it was kind of awkward. I'm not really sure parents knew how to approach it. I remember my dad tried to approach it, but it felt awkward. I think for him, it felt awkward for me. And so that's a tough conversation. So I think that's one reason. I think parents don't really know how to have that conversation. Sex, which is a normal, healthy, good thing, a good, normal, healthy part of human, being a human, that's how we all got here, it is off the table, and it's made very awkward and uncomfortable in a lot of homes because it's been repressed and suppressed, So I think it's an awkward conversation. And I think also parents just don't know how to approach that conversation. Or even today, I couldn't imagine being a parent trying to regulate my kids' pornography use on their phone. That device is tricky, and kids know how to circumvent anything, so I'm not sure. I feel like a lot of parents must be at a loss for how to even regulate this activity on the phones today, unless they just took the phone and set parental controls maybe, and took over the password and did some really, took a real hard line approach or something like that. But it seems like a big challenge, and I'm sure that's what a lot of parents run into today.
Oh, definitely agree. I couldn't agree more. And I think for me, what that means is that the risk that we now have as sort of men trying to help people become sort of, I suppose, more open and living more in this conscious space and more in a spiritual space is we're having more and more of a generation of boys who think they're men, like, because they haven't actually been able to move out of that. They're still in that, if it's a porn addiction, potentially that's still that 15-year-old is a 30-year-old male. You're still in the 15-year-old fantasy land about, the porn and how it sort of works. And there's elements where you haven't actually initiated and gone through the rite of passage of actually treating sex as being an energetic connection and a sacred connection that you're actually having with your partner. It's seen as almost an external physical activity, as opposed to this is still have it, but put some ceremony into it and understand the energetic connection and understand the sacredness of the body and how it works. And so for me, there's this generation of boys and girls, because I know there's even girls who basically are, into porn and watching a lot of porn. So there is this challenge, I think, in the next generation about how can we slow down this toxic culture, if you like, to put the harsh term onto it, and how do we bring people back to be kings and queens and men and women, in our society? Yeah,
I'm with you on that, man. I think, have you heard of this idea, like in child developmental psychology? If a kid is traumatized, at the age of 8 or 9 in a certain area, if that is not addressed and healed, and brought to the light, it's like they could be stuck, energetically in that place, all the way through adulthood. It's like you got to go back and do that deep work. And I have a suspicion that pornography, just like any sexual trauma, may act as a trauma. You know what I mean? To us. And maybe in many ways, as you kind of mentioned, maybe we're still acting, feeling, thinking, perceiving like that 13-year-old boy, that 14-year-old boy that first picked up that porno magazine and got into pornography heavily. So I do this work with men that are in their 30s and 40s and 50s. And we recognize that they're still viewing sex and women, through this young kind of teenage lens, and not only the way in which they see women and treat women, but also the way in which we act around sex. We have to hide around it. We have to sneak it. You're still acting like that young boy in many ways. So there seems to be a hang up, and a lot of the work that we do is going back and revisiting that young man and allowing him to now grow up and usher him into adulthood, seeing through a more noble lens,
And I'm all actually fully aligned with the child aspect. So there was a good conversation that I'd had with one of the other guests that was on the podcast, Wa Wienga from the Amen movement. And the way he put it was two adults having a conversation. But what happens is, you're right, our child gets, when that trauma happens, there's a snapshot of that child at that point in time. And that child has never known that the adult outside it has actually grown up. And you could have 2, 3, or 4 traumas, and then you end up with 2 adults having a conversation. What happens is the child steps in the middle and goes, no, hang on a minute, I'm going to take over here. And you end up having 2 or 3 hurt children having a conversation. The adults are standing back going, where the fuck did this go? Like, sorry about language, but where did this go off in a funny direction? Like, I thought we were talking about this.
Yeah.
And it's not till you recognize that it's each of those, it's the 6-year-old and it's the 12-year-old and the 14-year-old have all stood in the middle going, no, we're going to take over this because we were traumatized and we're reacting now.
Yeah.
And just right. It's being aware of that and being able to come back and say, is that really me, or is it that 14-year-old that's now actually, acting? Or if you didn't perform that night in bed, then all of a sudden your partner says something and you have this massive reaction. It's because the 14-year-old felt they had to perform a certain way due to a porn film they saw, right? Yeah. And they thought that was, I have to be able to last for an hour and a half or else I'm not this, magical study superstar, right? Yeah. Not really realizing that took 5 hours to create that one movie.
Right.
So there's a lot, I think that does come up in a lot of our lives about how we act. And it's like trying to recognize when is that little child popping up in front of us and we're like, no, it's okay. I've got this one for you.
Exactly.
But let's go and have a healing session on why you thought you had to jump in. So definitely. So let's move into the spiritual world for you. So yes, you've been through this journey. But yes, there's this underlying call or underlying, probably the inner being is saying, hang on, there is a calling for me. Yeah. As you said, you started in a Christian household, but you've sort of more moved across into the Buddhist side of it. Can you talk me through that journey?
Yeah. So I was born in a Christian household, grew up in the Pentecostal church, non-denominational church, and grew up in missions work, prison work. Some of my earliest memories are visiting inmates in, state prisons with my parents. My mom still runs a big, large Christian prison ministry in the state of Pennsylvania. And, through my younger years, my parents were always off to Haiti and Mexico doing missions work. I went to China doing missions work when I was a kid. So grew up, and, at one point I was in my teens and I was at church like four days a week, 4 times a week I was at church. So, and, for that, I really thank my parents because they gave me a really good foundation. They helped me to experience and begin to explore this idea of God and the divine. And I think they gave me a good moral foundation for my life and a good moral compass. So it was good. And as I grew, I found that what I was given wasn't really answering all the questions. And I still had a lot of questions on my own, which had not been addressed to my satisfaction. So I just began exploring and doing my own work. And, within any, I think, rigid religious, environment, there's this built-in fear. Like if you ask a question or you step outside of the boundaries, or you don't believe, then there's a fear of the threat of eternal damnation. So I think a lot of people will just stay in that box, whether they're conscious of that or not. But for whatever reason, I had the courage to step outside of that and begin asking some more questions. And also I found myself in my mid-20s, really in a really deep, dark, depressed state, really feeling victim to my mind and to my thinking and to my feeling, and was in a really dark, really a dark kind of obsessive place. Okay. And it was around that time that I picked up and began exploring ideas around mindfulness and meditation. Like, how do I get out of my head and how do I take a step back here? And, I was in a really tough space. So that prompting, I remember there was a really specific time that I kind of had this moment of awakening that if I could see my thoughts and I could experience my thoughts, then maybe that wasn't the whole part of me. Maybe there was something that could also perceive my thoughts. Maybe there was this observer, idea. Yep. So I remember having that moment of awareness, which was a big moment in my life, I think, recognizing that, okay, I'm having a thought, but I can also see the thought, and that was a big insight for me. So it was around that time I began exploring meditation, mindfulness, which ultimately led me to Buddhism and led me to a local meditation group, and then led me to a local order or chapter. And then I ultimately ended up going into seminary and studying with my teacher, in mindfulness, mindfulness meditation, mindfulness arts, Buddhism, and ultimately ended up becoming ordained as a Buddhist minister. And so my path was really just a path of seeking resolution, as you mentioned in my biography, to my own dilemmas and my own unanswered questions and my own suffering, really. And I wasn't receiving that with what I had been given. So that's how I kind of got on my path. But with that, I'm still very much an interfaith man. I'm still a man. I'm still an ardent student of the teachings of Christ and all teachers of truth and all way showers. And as a matter of fact, I'm sitting right now at a level 1 trauma center where I've been serving for the past year as a chaplain resident, and serving in the interfaith chaplaincy setting,
Yep.
So I really honor the unique and individual paths of all, and whatever that unique relationship with God might look like, and so that's kind of what led me to my journey. And whenever I began in seminary and decided to train under my teacher, I did not do that because I was planning on doing what I'm doing now, or even getting into the work that I'm doing now, but I just really wanted to deepen my own study, my own practice. And I've always felt kind of a spiritual calling in my life and a calling to serve others. And I've also been heavily involved in personal and spiritual development for many years and investing in myself and doing my own work. So I just felt at one point in my journey called to be of service to others and to work with others this way. And my personal and spiritual development work kind of came together with my ministry work and the work I was doing in Buddhism and interfaith chaplaincy work. And it all just kind of came together. And that's how I kind of ended up where I am now and continued to move along this path.
And that's beautiful, because the alignment between you and the job you do is so wonderful, because the amount of people that aren't in that position, here's who I really think I am, but here's the job I'm actually doing because I have to pay the man and I have to pay the mortgage and I'm indoctrinated and I have to do all these sorts of things. And that's where people don't really understand it. Stress and stress management, it's a whole different topic, but there's those elements. I would like to double back, because I've been doing, the word awakening is really interesting. I know I had my awakening a couple of years ago through a weekend session that I did, which I've talked a bit through on other episodes, but oddly mine was through breath work, where I went through 3 phases of basically wanting to die, happily wanting to say, I could die now, I'm all good. So almost going through a death phase, going through a grieving phase, and then watching what I call the demon of anger leave my body, like physically felt it leave my body. And for me, that was a very ritualistic process of the death of part of my ego, of who I was, the grieving, and allow myself to grieve that death of that person who I was, and allowing that spirit part that had died to then physically leave, and then coming out the other side and going, and never felt so light and so happy. And then since then, my openness and my willingness to talk through things and just explore in an open-minded fashion is just amazing. Pretty much going from judgmental to as non-judgmental as I can, or as inquiry as I can.
Beautiful.
So the awakening process, I love. I'd love to talk through a bit more with you about what does that, when you sort of said you went through that, like, was there what was that experience? Was it like in a deep depression, or was it in the middle of a meditation, or where did that sort of take place for you? Can you recall that? Was it anything specific, or?
Yeah, I feel like I can see myself still sitting there. I started my professional life in the hotel industry, and I got a hotel degree, and I worked my way up really fast. I was young. I was like 25 and doing really well in the corporate hotel industry, but I was really unhappy. And in this deep depression, like I mentioned, obsessive thinking, I think OCD, and just the mind just going in circles and circles, and a lot of self-loathing, and definitely didn't like myself and all the crap, and the way the mind can get all twisted up, and I just wanted to die. Sometimes that just feels easier, and it feels like relief. And I feel like I can still see myself sitting at my office desk, but I feel like I can I feel like I just remember the moment when I just kind of had this awakening, this awareness that I kind of stepped back and it's like I woke up and I could just see that I was having thoughts, but I wasn't my thoughts. Now, it's not to say I live like this all the time, because it's easy to still get enmeshed in our thoughts and be totally identified with our thoughts. And we really do identify with that ego self. It's like, it feels like us, maybe most of the time. But for a split second, I just could see the difference. It was the difference between the observer and then, whatever part of me was having the thoughts or doing the thinking. And I saw that, and it was just this little glimpse, this little shimmer of light that said, wait a second, if I can see it, maybe that's not all that I am. And I think I was able to step back and maybe just step back from identification with it for a moment. But yeah, it was very distinct. Like, I feel like I can zoom in right now. I can still see myself sitting at that desk. Like, I'm the observer now, looking back at that version of myself, having this moment of insight. And that was really it for me. But I think there was a lot of work probably done prior to that, and a lot of seeking and a lot of asking and a lot of study. And there's been a lot of work done since then, but I was just given, and I think if we all, I really do believe, brother, in the Bible, it says, knock and the door shall be opened unto you, and seek, and you shall receive, and I believe that I was seeking. And I think if we do that, ardently and consistently and, devoutly enough, we will receive the answers. And I was seeking and I was suffering, and I just received a moment of insight, and that was what I needed. And that deep, dark time in that moment is really what opened the door for where I am right now.
Yeah, no, that's beautiful. And I think that's the interesting thing. Again, those who are, I suppose, conscious, versus unconscious in their thinking, those who have become more conscious, which doesn't mean that there's a judgment that those who aren't. It just means that we've had an experience where we've been an observer of ourselves. We've actually had the opportunity to go, oh my God, that is just my ego. And I'm so attached to that egoic thing, or I'm so attached to this piece, or, and I'm the same as you. I catch myself, all the time, whether it be in conversations with my wife or even at work. I'll often stand back and go, or that you were just seeking validation then. Like, you were just this, you're attaching, these are parts of your ego that is still coming out. Mm-hmm. But being in a position to observe that, sometimes I argue whether that's good or bad, because sometimes staying asleep your whole life may not be a bad thing. Yeah. Because once you sort of wake up a little bit, and you're catching yourself all the time, you go, how much longer is this going to take? But it's a good thing to actually be, because I feel like, particularly in the work that you're doing, it enables you to actually see that the person that you're dealing with in the prison systems, or in the social justice systems, it's not who they are. It's a result of a culmination of things that have happened to them over their life that their ego is attached to, that has actually created them to be this thing. But underneath that, that's not who they truly are. And being able to help people detach, or actually become that observer, and actually see that this is conditioning from my culture or my parents or everything else. It's an amazing place to get to. Yeah,
it is. And I think one of the greatest gifts we can give to others is to see the potential in them. If we want to look at it from a biblical perspective, to see the Christ in them, to see the divine in them. In the Hindu tradition, at the end of yoga class, we bow to each other and we say namaste. The light in me bows and honors and sees the light in you. I think that's one of the greatest things we can do for others, and Mother Teresa talked about that. Mother Teresa talked about learning to see, Christ in all his distressing forms, and recognize that man sitting in that prison cell, in that meeting room, in his jumpsuit, that's me. That's me if I were born, in his condition. You know what I mean? So, and that's compassion, I think. So learning to see myself and others, and recognizing that, it's all part of our conditioning, and we all have that greatness and that potential within us, and that's the work that you and I are here to help support.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's, it'd be, you see tragic events that take place, and I can see the person who might have been the perpetrator, that took place. And my first thing is not to condemn them. It's like, what has happened in your life that has resulted in you having to take that action? Like, I'm completely compassionate for him, going, what took place that took you to the point where you might have, harmed kids or murdered somebody or done these sorts of things? Like, because that's not you as the essence of the true you. And so that's my first place that I like to be able to go to, and to go, I'm really interested. Like, where did we as a society not support you enough that's what the outcome was? Because there's a failure elsewhere in the system, or in not recognizing some of that early enough in your life to have actually had that sliding door moment where if someone intervened or had an awakening moment or helped you have that, your life could have been slightly different, but it ended up over here.
Yeah. Yeah, I think oh, I forget what I was going to say there, but yeah, I'm with you on that. Maybe I'll remember. I thought, I know what I was going to say. Yeah. So I think, we're put on these trajectories, we're born in this environment. And I think a lot of people end up there in those really difficult situations. They have been sleeping the whole time. They don't really know. I mean, they know on some level, but they're kind of unconsciously operating, out of this early conditioning, out of this, nature versus nurture. I don't know, but they're set on a trajectory. And one of the things that my sensei, who's a brilliant man, has taught me to learn to do is to learn what, kind of like similar to your practice, Stephen, is whenever we see someone acting in a way in which maybe we want to judge them, learning to see ourselves as them, and learn to see, them as us, asking ourselves, why would I do that? Or if we really want to personalize it, asking ourselves, why did I do that? And that really kind of ties back into like this oneness principle that we are all interconnected, but that really helps you see maybe through their lens, or walk just a little bit in their shoes. Why would I do something like that? Well, maybe, I didn't have it so good when I was growing up, so it's a practice, man, but I think it's a worthwhile and important practice.
Yeah, absolutely. But the timing of this conversation has been quite good, because I've always had an interest in Buddhism, but have never actually sort of done enough research or looking into it. And I've just finished reading The Three Pillars of Zen, which is, I think Philip Gardo, wrote that book. And it was the first real true insight I got into Zen Buddhism and how it worked. And interestingly, my meditation practice is based on more of, I think Maharaja Krishna based, more Indian-based practice, whereas that question is, who was I before my parents were born? And in the Zen Buddhism, one of the questions to go through is, what was my face before my parents were born? And it was really interesting to sit there and go, yeah, this is still, they're both coming from the same ancient background conversation of when the meditation. So like, and then when the thought pops in, it's not about when you meditate, you're never going to have any thoughts. It's more about to whom is the thought occurring.
Yes.
And being able to separate out and go, so that thought came in, but to who did that actually occur? Was that to my little I, my ego mind, or was that to the big I? The answer is it's always the ego mind.
Yeah, of course.
It's a trick question, but the reality is, yeah. And that's what I've really loved now in diving back into that. But also seeing that, the Zen Buddhism element and what I've been doing, that they're very close in basically getting to that understanding that we're all the one, and then moving away from the labeling aspect. Do I walk up and go, oh, that's a tree, and then I observe it, or I just see something that's got some beauty in front of me without actually saying that's a tree, that's a flower, that's this sort of thing. And that's the oneness that's coming in, going, I can just see beauty in what's around me, or I can be grateful and thankful for the divine, the creator, the God, again, what do you want to call it, that actually has put this in front of us.
Yeah.
And then the other aspect is coming to terms with death is just inevitable and it's okay. And so, I'm very comfortable in that aspect now, because I know that, what's before me and what's after me is going to continue on. There is just this body form that'll just decay when I'm gone. It's okay for people to grieve for it, but it's a really good, comforting space to get into. Are you where does that sit with you? Is that something that because, being Osho and in that space, is that some of the work that you've also done from a Buddhism point of view? Or
Yeah, absolutely. A good friend of mine once said that, it's important that we contemplate our own death, and so, a lot of people think they have an idea about what occurs when we die, but we don't know. It's the great mystery. So we'll see. I have a feeling that some sort of transition occurs. And I like to think I'm at peace with the idea of my death. However, who knows? Who knows whenever that time comes, how I might feel about that. But one thing I really love to do in the practice of contemplating my death, I walk in a cemetery close to my house almost every day. And, I like to think that life is fleeting, and no matter what, one way or the other, nobody gets out of here alive, so why don't I live my life more fully and make peace with the idea of my death now, because it is inevitable, and there's a practice in the Buddhist tradition where we really, it's like a contemplation of our death, and we see ourselves as a body that's dead, and we view the body decaying and turning into a skeleton and ultimately turning into dust, but just, I think, familiarizing ourselves with that idea, making peace with that idea, and recognizing that everything is impermanent. And there's nothing to be afraid of, and whatever good and loving energy that brought us here, we can trust that on our way out, I think, too.
Yeah, no, definitely agree. And some of the things that I've been looking into is more some of the Indigenous, Native American, Australian Aboriginal, and how they see things, and they have this, particularly in Australia, it's like connection to country, which is why I gave the acknowledgement at the start of the podcast. But they do not differentiate between animate and inanimate objects. To them, they are just all part of country, and they're all connected. So the rock is as sacred as the kangaroo, is as sacred as the tree, is as sacred as the flat. They've all got a place to go. And the interesting thing, the rock was there before we were born. The rock's going to be there after we've gone. So it is actually more enduring than what we are. Although as humans, we hierarchy ourselves above it. But the reality is, that rock has a much longer lifespan and living than what we do. And it is living its truest and fullest life.
Indeed.
It knows it. One, it doesn't know it's a rock because we called it that, but it just knows what its role is, and it's doing it perfectly. And it's okay. And it's not comparing itself to any other rock going, well, that rock's a bit bigger than me. Just doesn't do that, So again, that's for me a really nice alignment about where we sit. And it's a nice grounding sort of practice for me.
My teacher teaches a beautiful concept. He calls it incense living. And the phrase he uses is that the world is on fire and we are paper. So it's all burning and our life is fleeting before our eyes, and this idea of incense living says we can live our lives and like what scent will we choose to leave behind? Will we live our lives beautifully and leave behind a beautiful scent like incense, or will we live our lives not so beautifully and leave behind a stench? So I think contemplation of how we choose to live our lives and the legacy we choose to leave in our wake.
Man, that's beautiful. I actually really love that. I'm certainly going to think about that moving forward. And that's why I love having these conversations, right? So for every man I get on, there's that different angle and there's that different perspective and there's that different way of actually viewing or seeing things. So yeah, I do actually love that. You've been fantastic with your time. I really appreciate, that you've jumped on today. What I'd just like to ask at the end is, is there a message for the men, the boys, or even, the women that are listening into this who have got men in their lives? Is there a message that you would like to sort of leave? I know, the main space that you've been trying to work through is this making peace with porn, but I don't want to direct you there. A key message you would think you'd like to leave others so that, they can walk away with like a little summary view?
Yeah, well, I mean, in regard to the porn conversation, Stephen, I would just say, if you sense that pornography maybe is out of alignment for yourself, I think, if you're sensing that, it likely is, and I would recommend just giving it a try for a week, 14 days, and one, see if you can do it, and that's going to be a big indicator for you. And if you are able, and if you're not, that's going to say something. But if you are able to achieve 10, 14 days porn-free, really take a look and notice the subtle differences that you begin to experience. I find that we all find, the work that we're doing, we've identified that porn is a very toxic thing. And if we can begin to uproot and weed the garden a bit, or our beautiful natural essence can begin to just come through. We can connect more deeply with our own spirit, with our own essence, and really get back into alignment with our own sense of integrity. From the standpoint of a woman, who maybe doesn't understand why her husband can't just quit looking at porn, there's some really deeply ingrained, embedded wounds that are there, and he's obviously trying to meet some needs which he's been unable to identify, on his own. So there's more to the story there, but there is hope, and there is freedom available. So that would be my basic message, I think. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you. I really appreciate that. And they're both really strong messages. I really like what you've touched on in the last one. It's about, do women see that as, a bad thing, or can they actually have the compassion to understand that there is something they're trying to fill, but it's not something they're trying to fill because the woman in their life is not giving it to them. It's something they're trying to fill from a previous trauma that was before this relationship took place.
Yeah.
And it's deeply ingrained. And so don't take it personally that they're potentially looking at porn. Try to understand and help them go through that healing journey. And whether they get in touch with a counselor, whether it's in touch with a men's group, whether it's in touch with something else, help them on that path and help them start to move down that journey, and then just be patient with them and give them compassion.
Absolutely.
And I think that's what we can actually do to try and help, men and women that might be also addicted to move through this space.
For sure.
Awesome, Matt. I really love this conversation. We've covered off many things: porn, spirituality, the Buddhism aspect, all areas that, I've either had addictions to or I'm currently passionate about. You've enlightened me, and that's what I like. I learn every time I come onto this to talk. So thank you for your enlightenment.
Indeed.
Thank you for your open and honesty. And I wish you all the best for the rest of your day, although it's probably your evening over there. So you're probably getting ready to knock off work and go home and have a lovely meal and get a good night's sleep.
Yes, brother. It's been a wonderful conversation. Thanks so much for having me. And I look forward to a continued connection, brother.
Cheers. Thanks, man. We'll chat soon.
Yes,
cheers. So that was Matt Sinkovitz. And, absolutely what I actually hope this conversation would be is exactly where it went. I just love the men that come on board and their just openness and honesty about the journey. I really love Matt's talking into his awakening process and that ability to, have the moment of seeing himself as an observer of his own thoughts. That's super powerful. And if anyone can get to that space, that's an amazing journey to go on. So that's a wrap for episode 36 of the Unearthed Man Podcast. As I said earlier, if you want to find me, you can find me on LinkedIn, Facebook, or Instagram. So that's it for now. Seeing you. Much love and peace. Milbo.